The lights in the Hale Dynamics lobby had been set up for television. Nearly
Hey there, little
400,000
astronaut.
viewers were watching the live broadcast of Behind the Empire when Olivia Hart stood at the marble podium, midway through a sentence, and a janitor's cart rolled into the frame. She laughed, the sound bright and practiced. "Some people," she said, "spend their entire lives mopping floors because they never learned how to stand up." The man pushing the cart stopped for exactly 2 seconds. He looked into the camera, gave a single polite nod, and walked on. He did not hurry. He did not flinch. The clip began trending before she finished her speech. By 10 o'clock that night, it had surpassed 1.2 million views. In the corner office on the 42nd floor, Olivia stood at the window with a glass of something dark in her hand, while Jonathan Reed raised his own glass toward her reflection in the blackened glass. "You made it look effortless," he said. "It was effortless. That's the part the algorithm loves, cruelty that wears a smile." She did not correct him. She had stopped correcting Jonathan a long time ago. Outside the window, the Charles River lay flat and black beneath the night sky, and the lights of Cambridge blinked across the water like a quieter city refusing to compete. Across town, in a third-floor walk-up off Dorchester Avenue, Michael Bennett set his keys on the kitchen counter without making a sound. The television was on, muted, casting blue light across the carpet. His daughter, Emma, had fallen asleep on the sofa with a library book open across her chest, a paperback about the rings of Saturn. He stood there for a long moment, watching her breathe. Then he gently closed the book, slipped one arm beneath her knees and the other beneath her shoulders, and carried her down the narrow hallway. He had to angle her carefully through the doorway. He tucked the blanket beneath her chin and turned off the light. The apartment grew quiet in the way that only a home with a single sleeping child can grow quiet. He did not check his phone. He did not open his laptop. He sat alone at the kitchen table in the dark for a while. Then he made himself a sandwich he never ate. The next morning, he arrived at the Hale Dynamics building at 6:45, the same as every other morning. The security guard at the loading dock would not meet his eyes. In the locker room, 2 members of the cleaning crew stopped talking the moment he walked in. One of them, a younger man named Hector, stared at the floor and said quietly, "I'm sorry, man." "Nothing to be sorry for," Michael replied. He pulled on his gloves. At 7:30, he was wiping fingerprints from the elevator panels when the lobby doors opened and Olivia Hart walked in. He felt her notice him. He did not turn around. He continued polishing the brushed steel until she stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. 42 floors of vertical silence. She waited. She had spent 11 years in rooms where waiting was a weapon, and now she waited for him to flinch, apologize, or throw something back at her. He did none of those things. Without being asked, he pressed the button for her floor because he had watched her every morning for 9 months and knew exactly which one she used. She noticed something strange. He had pressed the second of 2 nearly identical buttons, the one she always chose because the other one stuck slightly beneath her thumb. She had never told anyone in the building that. "Good morning, Miss Hart," he said. She studied his profile. There was nothing there. No resentment, no performance. Just a man doing his job inside a moving metal box. Part 2. Margaret Collins arrived on Tuesday at exactly 11 o'clock, just as she had on the same Tuesday of every quarter for the past 3 years. She wore a charcoal suit and carried a leather folio softened by age at the corners. She announced herself to the receptionist with the kind of courtesy that suggested she had once been someone's grandmother and had never enjoyed being underestimated. The meeting in Olivia Hart's office lasted 12 minutes. Margaret presented the quarterly holdings report from Vance Capital, a passive institutional investor that had appeared on the Hale Dynamics cap table since before Olivia's father died. Margaret turned pages. Olivia initialed each one in the lower right corner without reading it, exactly as she had done every quarter for 3 years. Same as always, Margaret agreed. Vance Capital extends its continued confidence in your leadership. Pass that along, would you? I always do. They shook hands. Margaret packed her folio. At the door, she paused and turned halfway back toward Olivia. For a moment, she looked at her longer than etiquette required. Then she left. Inside the elevator, Margaret removed her phone and made a call. The line connected on the second ring. "Have you seen the clip?" she asked. A man's voice answered, Low, calm, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "I've seen it. Do you want me to handle it?" One letter, and she'd be in legal counsel by morning. A pause. "No, Michael, let her walk the rest of the way down this road herself." Another pause. Then he added quietly, "She has to find the bottom before she can find solid ground. And if the bottom hurts, maybe she'll remember what hurting feels like." Margaret stepped out into the lobby. Across the marble floor, Michael Bennett was wiping a smudge from the revolving door, slowly, methodically, as though the smudge were the only thing in the world that mattered. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it. He finished cleaning the panel, folded the cloth, and moved to the next section of glass. That night, Olivia stayed in the office until nearly 10. She told her assistant she was preparing for shareholder meetings. She was not. She stood at the window with her arms folded. 2 floors below, the lobby lights flickered on one section at a time. She saw the reflection of a man in gray coveralls cleaning the inside of the south-facing glass. He looked up. For half a second, their eyes met across the darkness. Something about it felt wrong. He did not look at her the way a janitor looks at a chief executive. He looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he has decided not to solve yet. Then he returned to cleaning the glass. An hour later, she sat at her desk and found a ceramic cup of ginger tea resting on the corner of her blotter. A slice of lemon floated on the surface. She had been coughing all day. No one in the building knew her well enough to bring her ginger tea, certainly not without leaving a note. She did not drink it. For a long time she simply stared at it, the way someone studies evidence. Meanwhile, in the third-floor walk-up on Dorchester Avenue, Michael Bennett opened a small steel safe hidden in the back of his bedroom closet. Inside were his wife's will, a folded marriage certificate, and a brass company seal worn smooth by years of use. He touched the seal with his thumb. "Rachel," he said quietly, "I'll know when it's time." He sat there holding it for a long while. By the time he finally returned it to the safe and spun the dial shut, the brass had become warm in his hand. A week passed. The clip stopped trending. Other executives said other foolish things in other buildings, and the internet moved on. Olivia did not. She began staying later than necessary. She told her assistant it was because of the upcoming shareholder meeting and the proxy battle she could sense developing beneath Jonathan Reed's polished smile. That explanation was only half true. The other half pushed a squeaking janitor's cart through the 42nd floor hallways at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and midnight. She began creating reasons to cross his path. The coffee machine in the executive kitchen mysteriously broke 3 days in a row, despite having worked flawlessly for the previous 18 months. She left her office door open whenever she heard the cart approaching. She made small talk about the cold front moving over the Berkshires, about whether snow would arrive before Thanksgiving, and about how Boston looked from 42 floors up at 3 in the morning. Michael answered politely. He never asked questions in return. One night she leaned against the doorway of a supply closet while he refilled a dispenser and casually asked where he had grown up. "Lowell," he replied. "And before that, a few other places. What did you do before this?" He considered her for a moment. "Engineering." She raised an eyebrow. "For a while." "Where?" "MIT. A long time ago." She laughed. It was the laugh of someone who thought she was being kind. "MIT. Of course." He said nothing. "And how does an MIT engineer end up here?" "The same way anyone ends up anywhere," he said. "Things change." He did not elaborate. He did not react to her skepticism. He simply twisted the cap back onto the dispenser, wished her a quiet evening, and pushed his cart down the hallway. Olivia watched him leave. For no reason she could explain, she felt the cold sensation of having just lost something she had not even realized was a game. Jonathan saw them talking on Thursday. He said nothing that day. On Friday, he walked into Olivia's office without knocking and closed the door behind him. "Olivia." "Jonathan, the janitor. What about him?" "Don't make me say it twice. Whatever this is, it ends. The PR team already has this building on watch. We cannot afford another story." Olivia set her pen down very carefully. She had set her pen down very carefully 1,000 times in that office, and Jonathan had always mistaken it for agreement. "Jonathan," she said, "do you remember the press release you wrote when my father died? The one that called you the natural successor carrying forward his vision?" "Yes." I have never asked you to write another press release about me. He stared at her. She continued. And I am not asking for your advice about my building or my staff. If I want either, I'll ask for it. Are we clear? Jonathan looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was the practiced smile of a man filing a conversation away for future use. Crystal clear. After he left, Olivia opened her laptop and typed a name into the search bar. Michael Bennett, MIT. Structural engineer, Boston. Nothing. She refined the search, then refined it again. Alumni directories, archived conference programs, vendor databases, professional records, nothing. Not a profile, not a paper, not a mention. It was as though he had been erased. She closed the laptop and sat alone in the darkness, listening for the distant squeak of a wheel. Late Friday afternoon, sunlight spilled through the lobby windows in long rectangles of autumn gold. On one of the benches sat a girl of about 8 years old with her knees together and a hardcover textbook open across her lap. Olivia would have walked past if not for the title. Introduction to Astrophysical Mechanics. Her steps slowed before she consciously decided to stop. The girl looked up. She had freckles across the bridge of her nose and carried herself with the attentive posture of a child who had learned adults listened more carefully when she appeared interested. "Hello," Olivia said. "Hello. Is that your book?" "It's from the Northeastern Library. My dad takes me there every Saturday. Do you understand it?" "Some of it. Right now I'm reading about precession." Olivia sat down on the bench. She had not sat on a lobby bench in 7 years. "Tell me about precession." The girl's face lit up immediately. "It's the wobble. When something spins like a top, it doesn't stay perfectly straight. The axis makes a slow circle. Earth does it too. Every 26,000 years, it completes one full cycle." Olivia smiled despite herself. 26,000 years? That's why the North Star isn't always the North Star. A long time ago it was Thuban. In about 12,000 years it'll be Vega. Why Vega? Because it's blue. Olivia found herself smiling again. "What's your name?" "Emma." "That's a beautiful name." "Thank you. What's yours?" "Olivia." Emma nodded seriously. "That's a beautiful name too." For another minute they sat together on the bench. Olivia Hart, who could quote dozens of leadership books from memory, discovered she had nothing she wanted to say. Then a familiar voice came from the far side of the lobby. "Emma." Michael Bennett stood there in jeans and a worn flannel shirt, his coat draped over one arm. He had finished work for the day. He saw them together and stopped a few yards away. Olivia looked up. For the first time, she was not looking at a janitor. Emma slid off the bench. Then, on impulse, she wrapped her arms around Olivia's neck. Olivia froze. Slowly, almost uncertainly, she placed one hand against the small of the child's back. The hug lasted 4 seconds. "It was nice meeting you, Miss Olivia," Emma said. Then she ran back to her father. Michael nodded politely. Together, they walked out through the revolving doors and into the cold afternoon. Olivia watched them through the glass. Emma reached upward, and Michael took her hand without even looking down, the practiced gesture of a father who had done it thousands of times before. They turned left at the corner and disappeared from sight. Olivia remained seated on the bench long after they were gone, staring at the doorway through which they had left. Par trois. On the 4th-floor balcony overlooking the lobby, Jonathan Reed stood watching. The rim of his coffee cup hovered near his lips, but he never took a sip. He simply watched Olivia Hart remain seated on the bench long after Michael Bennett and Emma disappeared through the revolving doors. Finally, he lowered the cup, turned away, and walked toward a quieter corner of the mezzanine. There, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number he had not called in nearly a year. "It's me," he said when the line connected. "I need you to dig deeper on the janitor. Whatever is strange about him, I want it." The third quarter numbers arrived the following Wednesday. They missed analyst expectations by 40 cents per share. Jonathan made his move that afternoon during the standing committee meeting. He moved carefully, the way a man moves when he has spent weeks preparing every step. He spoke about investor confidence. He spoke about stability during uncertain market conditions. He spoke about stewardship. He used the word 4 times, and never once mentioned Olivia by name. By the end of the meeting, everyone in the room understood exactly what he was proposing. By Wednesday evening, Olivia had one of her analysts run the proxy calculations. The results made her stomach turn. Jonathan had already secured commitments from 4 institutional investors, 6 more percentage points, and he would have enough support to force a special vote. She skipped dinner. She remained in the office. By midnight, she had read every email Jonathan had sent during the previous quarter. By 1 o'clock in the morning, she finally understood something she should have realized years earlier. Jonathan had been preparing to remove her from power since the day she inherited the chair. There was a drawer in her desk she had not opened since her father's funeral. She opened it now. Inside sat a single envelope with her name written in her father's handwriting. Beside it rested a note she had written 3 days after becoming CEO and never sent to anyone. She read her own note first. Then she read her father's. When she finished, she returned both papers to the drawer and quietly closed it. There were no answers inside. Only memories. Only people who were gone. At 1:15 a.m., a gentle knock sounded against the open office door. Michael stood in the doorway holding a brown paper bag and a bottle of water. "You haven't left all night," he said. "I'm working." "I know." He stepped inside and placed the bag on the corner of her desk. Inside was a turkey sandwich on rye bread, an apple, and a small bag of pretzels. "Big decisions shouldn't be made on an empty stomach," he said. Olivia looked down at the food and then back at him. 11 weeks earlier, she had stood in front of hundreds of thousands of people and publicly mocked a man exactly like him. Now he was standing in her office at 1 in the morning bringing her dinner. "Michael," she said softly. It was the first time she had used his first name. "Yes?" "Why don't you hate me?" He did not answer immediately. He stood quietly in the doorway with his hands tucked into the pockets of his coveralls while the building settled around them with the small sounds office buildings make in the middle of the night. Finally, he spoke. "Because you're afraid." She blinked. "What?" "People who are afraid don't need more enemies." The words landed harder than any insult could have. He turned toward the hallway. "Michael." He stopped and looked back. "Who are you?" For the first time, he smiled. Not a large smile, not a dramatic one, just a small smile that did not need to reach his eyes. "I'm the man bringing you a sandwich at 1 in the morning, Miss Hart." Then he nodded toward the paper bag. "Eat it before it gets cold." He pulled the door halfway closed behind him and disappeared into the hallway. Olivia sat motionless. The sandwich rested on the desk in front of her. For a long time she stared at it. Then something inside her finally broke. "For the first time in 6 years," she cried. Not quietly, not carefully, not the way she had taught herself to cry after becoming CEO. Not the way she had cried in private after her father's funeral. She cried openly and without restraint, like someone who had carried a stone in her mouth for years and had suddenly been given permission to spit it out. She cried for the version of herself she had spent years pretending to be. She cried for every person she had stepped over while climbing higher. She cried for her father, who had been difficult but never cruel. Most of all, she cried for the difference between those two things. Eventually, the tears stopped. The office became quiet again. She sat still and listened to her own breathing. Then she opened the paper bag. She ate the sandwich. She ate the apple. She drank the water. Afterward, she washed her face in the executive bathroom and finally went home. For the first time in months, she slept. 3 floors below, Michael Bennett stood alone in a janitor's closet, rinsing out a mop while gray water swirled down the drain. The next morning, Olivia called an emergency board meeting for 8 o'clock. She had no choice. At the current rate, Jonathan would have enough votes by the end of the week to challenge her leadership directly. At 7:58 a.m., directors filed into the boardroom on the 43rd floor. Jonathan took his usual seat to Olivia's left. He looked rested, confident, and completely certain of victory. Olivia allowed him to speak first. Jonathan stood and placed a black binder in the center of the conference table. Then he began reading from a prepared statement. Loss of confidence, leadership concerns, the need for experienced stewardship, recommendation for interim chairmanship. Every sentence had been polished and rehearsed. Every word had been carefully chosen. The room listened in silence. Then the boardroom door opened. Margaret Collins walked inside. She had not been invited. The company's general counsel immediately rose halfway from his chair. "Mrs. Collins, sit down, Robert," Margaret said pleasantly. The attorney sat down. Margaret walked to the head of the table, carrying her leather folio. "I am exercising rights granted under Section 7 of the Vance Capital Shareholder Agreement," she said. "You may want to review it." No one spoke. Margaret opened the folio. Inside were 3 documents. She placed them carefully in front of Olivia. Then she addressed the room. "On behalf of Vance Capital Holdings, I am formally withdrawing the firm's standing voting instructions. Effective immediately, our voting interest will be exercised directly and in person." The room became completely still, the kind of stillness that settles over a room when everyone realizes the ground beneath them has suddenly shifted. Jonathan was the first to recover. 51%? He asked. His voice sounded tighter than before. "That's the preferred voting class." "Yes," Margaret replied. "That class has never participated in board proceedings." "It will now." Jonathan stared at her. Then he asked the question no one else seemed capable of asking. "Who controls the trust?" Margaret looked at him almost sympathetically, like a teacher listening to a student finally arrive at the correct answer. 3 years late," she said. Then she folded her hands. "The sole beneficiary of the Vance Capital Trust since the death of Rachel Vance Bennett 3 years ago has been her husband." The room remained silent. Olivia felt her heartbeat slow, stop, and begin again. Bennett. Michael Bennett. The janitor's cart. The ginger tea. The sandwich at 1 in the morning. The man who never flinched. Every disconnected piece suddenly slid into place. Jonathan opened his mouth, but Olivia spoke first. "Adjourn the meeting." "Olivia." "Adjourn it, Jonathan." Her voice was calm, cold, and final. "Or I will." No one argued. The meeting ended, and before anyone could stop her, Olivia was already heading for the stairwell. Par 4. Olivia did not take the elevator. She took the stairs, all 43 flights of them. By the time she pushed through the basement door, her lungs were burning and her heels felt like instruments of torture. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air smelled faintly of concrete, detergent, and cold metal. At the far end of the corridor, Michael Bennett was working. He moved the mop in slow, even strokes across the floor. One fluorescent fixture had burned out, leaving a long stretch of shadow between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Olivia stood there trying to catch her breath while 1,000 different sentences fought for space inside her head. Michael straightened, leaned the mop against the wall, and looked at her. Not like an employee looking at a chief executive. Not like a stranger meeting someone for the first time. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone he has been waiting months to truly see him. Then he gave her a single polite nod. The same nod he had given on the live stream. The exact same one. Without another word, he picked up the mop and returned to work. For 3 days, she did not see him anywhere in the building. She did not call him. She did not ask Margaret Collins to contact him. She simply waited. The special shareholder meeting was scheduled for Monday morning in the ground floor auditorium of Hale Dynamics headquarters. 240 seats. Press gathered behind a designated barrier near the rear wall. Representatives from the State Attorney General's office had quietly requested observer status. The atmosphere felt less like a shareholder meeting and more like a trial. Jonathan Reed stepped onto the stage and approached the podium. He spoke for 11 uninterrupted minutes about governance, confidence, market stability, and the responsibilities of leadership during uncertain economic cycles. Behind him, a presentation screen displayed proxy counts and voting projections. According to Jonathan's numbers, 53% of shareholders supported removing Olivia Hart as chairwoman. Jonathan smiled. He had counted those votes 100 times. Then he called for the vote. At that exact moment, the doors at the back of the auditorium opened. A man entered wearing a dark navy suit. No entourage, no briefcase, no assistants. Just one man walking calmly down the center aisle. At first, the audience recognized only the face from the viral clip. Then recognition spread through the room in waves. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Silence rolled across the auditorium. Michael Bennett climbed the 3 steps to the stage. He took the microphone. "My name is Michael Bennett," he said. I am the sole trustee of Vance Capital Holdings. Since 2022, I have controlled 51% of the company's preferred voting shares. The room froze. Jonathan's face remained remarkably still, but his hands betrayed him. They tightened around the edge of the podium. This man, Jonathan said carefully, was working as a janitor in this building 3 days ago. I was, Michael replied calmly. Before that, I was a structural engineer affiliated with MIT. Before that, I was a husband. After that, I became a father. The janitor's job was simply the work that allowed me to continue being the last two. No one laughed. No one moved. Michael turned toward the audience. Vance Capital was founded by my late wife's father, Edward Vance, in 1979. In 2020, Hale Dynamics was 30 days away from defaulting on its senior debt obligations. At that time, my wife signed the agreement that kept this company alive. He paused. The silence deepened. She did so on one condition. Her name would never appear publicly because she did not want the rescue to become a burden carried by the woman who would eventually lead this company. His eyes shifted toward Olivia. That woman was Olivia Hart. The entire room followed his gaze. My wife believed Olivia had earned her seat. For the last 9 months, I have worked inside this building to determine whether my wife was right. Another pause. Then he nodded. She was. Several people lowered their eyes. Others simply stared. Michael turned back toward Jonathan. The motion before this meeting is withdrawn. Vance Capital votes against any attempt to remove Olivia Hart without legitimate cause. Furthermore, I am requesting an independent investigation into Mr. Jonathan Reed's proxy solicitation activities, including whether material non-public information was improperly used during those efforts. Then he returned the microphone to its stand. The meeting did not officially adjourn. It simply ceased to exist. Within hours, the story spread through every major financial publication in the country. By noon, Jonathan had been escorted from the building pending investigation. By 2 o'clock, the governance committee announced his immediate suspension. Employees gathered in hallways whispering about the mysterious janitor who turned out to own the company. Investors flooded the company with calls. Analysts revised their reports. News helicopters circled downtown Boston. Everything changed. Everything except Michael. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, Olivia found him walking through the long glass corridor on the second floor. Sunlight poured through the windows in wide bands of pale gold. The hallway was completely empty except for the two of them. She stopped beside him. "Why didn't you stop me?" she asked. Michael looked out the window. "Stop you? On the live stream. One phone call would have ended everything. You needed to see yourself." The answer irritated her. "That's not fair." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." His honesty removed any possibility of argument. They stood together in silence while sunlight slowly shifted across the floor. Finally, Olivia spoke again. "You knew who I was the entire time." "Yes. And you still helped me?" "Yes." "Why?" Michael smiled slightly. "Because my wife asked me to." Olivia looked at him. For the first time, she understood that Rachel Bennett was still shaping events years after her death. The realization humbled her. 3 days later, Olivia stood once again behind the same marble podium where everything had begun. The same lobby, the same camera crew, the same network. Only this time, everything felt different. The producer asked if she wanted prepared talking points. She declined. The broadcast went live. Viewer numbers climbed rapidly. 50,000, 100,000, 200,000. The number continued rising. Olivia looked directly into the camera. "My name is Olivia Hart," she began. 11 weeks ago, I stood in this lobby and said something cruel about a man who worked in this building. The cruelty was not an accident. It was a habit. And that habit belonged to me." The room remained silent. "I am not asking for his forgiveness today. Forgiveness requested on a live stream is not forgiveness. It is marketing." The viewer count continued climbing. "I will only say this. Michael Bennett is a better person than I have been, and I intend to spend the rest of my career becoming worthy of the position he chose to leave me in." When she finished, she stepped away from the podium. She refused all questions. The comments beneath the live stream changed tone almost immediately. Many viewers who had mocked Michael months earlier now praised him. Others admitted they had judged him unfairly. By the time the broadcast ended, more than 400,000 people had watched. Olivia never saw the final number. She had already left through the side entrance and walked halfway down the block before finally allowing herself to breathe. Across town, in a third-floor walk-up off Dorchester Avenue, Michael Bennett sat on the couch while Emma rested against his shoulder. The television glowed softly in the corner of the room. "Dad?" Emma asked. "Yes? Is that lady your friend?" Michael remained quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. "I think she's still learning how to be her own friend first." Emma considered that carefully. Then she nodded, as though the answer explained something she had already suspected. Outside, the first cold rain of November tapped softly against the window. Emma fell asleep before the commercial break ended. Michael sat there watching the rain fall beneath the streetlight and said nothing more. Par cinq. The following week, Olivia offered Michael the chairman's seat. He declined without hesitation. Instead, he proposed a restructured independent board, 4 new directors selected by a committee of 3, with the Vance voting interest retaining its authority but surrendering its visibility. Olivia would remain chief executive officer, but for the first time since inheriting the company, she would have genuine autonomy. They worked through the details in her office over the course of 3 evenings. On the 3rd evening, shortly after 8 o'clock, Michael arrived carrying a familiar brown paper bag. Turkey on rye, an apple, pretzels. Olivia looked at the bag and laughed softly. "You know I can afford catering." "You can," Michael replied, "but the sandwich is better." They ate together at the conference table while the lights of Boston blurred against the dark windows behind them. Halfway through the meal, Olivia glanced up. "Michael." "Yes? That's the first time I've said your name without a title." He smiled slightly. "I noticed." She looked away almost immediately. He did the same. Neither said anything more. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that forms slowly between 2 people who no longer feel the need to perform for each other. A silence built over long autumn evenings, difficult conversations, and truths neither of them had expected to find. At 10 o'clock, Olivia walked him to the elevator. Michael carried the empty paper bag because, as he explained, there was no trash can in the hallway he considered satisfactory. The elevator doors opened. Neither of them said goodnight. He stepped inside. The doors closed. Olivia stood there for several seconds before returning to her office. She worked until midnight, without checking her phone a single time. 3 blocks away, Jonathan Reed sat alone in a dim corner booth inside a neighborhood bar. His phone was pressed against his ear. "I have a story," he said quietly. "One you're going to want to hear. Bring a notebook." The article appeared the following Thursday morning on a mid-tier financial website, whose audience was larger than its reputation. The headline was phrased as a question. The article itself was little more than insinuation disguised as journalism. It suggested that Michael Bennett had deliberately embedded himself inside Hale Dynamics to psychologically influence Olivia Hart. It implied that the rescue of the company years earlier had been orchestrated as leverage. It questioned the authenticity of Olivia's public apology. It painted the entire story as a calculated takeover disguised as redemption. By 11 o'clock, 3 larger outlets had republished versions of the story. By noon, Olivia had scheduled a press conference for 2 o'clock. She entered the briefing room without a binder, without legal counsel, and without prepared remarks. The only person accompanying her was Margaret Collins, who took a seat in the front row with her leather folio resting on her lap. Cameras filled the room. Reporters waited. Olivia stepped to the podium. "In 2020, she began, Hale Dynamics was 30 days away from defaulting on $140 million in senior debt. My father had been dead for 6 months. I had been chief executive officer for 93 days. The board that governed this company at the time was preparing to dismantle it and sell its assets. A private investment vehicle called Vance Capital provided the funding that kept this company alive. I was told the investor was passive. That statement was true. It was simply not the complete truth." The room fell silent. "The complete truth is that the person who saved this company was a woman named Rachel Vance Bennett. She died 6 months later from pancreatic cancer. Before she died, she instructed her husband to honor that investment and to allow the woman sitting in this chair to earn the right to remain there. Every camera in the room remained fixed on her. For 3 years, her husband honored that promise. During the last 9 months of those 3 years, he did so while working as a member of the cleaning staff in this building and raising his daughter alone. I humiliated him publicly. I repaid kindness with arrogance. He responded by protecting my position when he had every legal right to remove me from it. That is not manipulation. That is decency. A kind of decency I had never encountered before and am still learning how to recognize. When she finished speaking, she stepped away from the podium. She took no questions. The story collapsed almost immediately. By Friday afternoon, public sentiment had reversed. By Monday morning, the Securities and Exchange Commission had opened a formal inquiry into Jonathan Reed's proxy solicitation efforts. By Wednesday, 2 institutional investors who had supported him publicly withdrew their commitments and requested that their names be removed from any association with the matter. Jonathan stopped returning calls. The financial website that had published the original story issued a correction on Friday and a full retraction the following Monday. The reporter responsible quietly left journalism 3 months later and accepted a corporate communications position in Hartford. The larger outlets removed their coverage and moved on to the next controversy. None of them mentioned Michael by name. None of them needed to. That weekend, Margaret visited Michael at the apartment on Dorchester Avenue. She brought a bottle of bourbon that had once belonged to Rachel's father. "She would have been proud of you," Margaret said. Michael poured 2 fingers into each glass. "She was right," he replied. "That's what matters." Margaret studied him over the rim of her glass. "And Olivia?" she asked. Michael did not answer. He simply looked out the window toward the gray November sky. Margaret smiled faintly and set her glass on the windowsill. She had practiced trust law long enough to understand that some truths arrived on their own schedule. "Drink your bourbon, Michael," she said. After a moment, he did. 6 weeks later, the first snow of the season arrived overnight. It was a thin, polite snowfall that dusted the curbs of Boylston Street and softened the edges of the city. Boston carried that early winter quiet that made buses sound distant and streetlights seem warmer than usual. On the 42nd floor of Hale Dynamics, Olivia Hart sat alone in her office at 6 o'clock on a Friday evening. The overhead lights were off. Only the desk lamp remained on. There were no crises waiting for her, no board battles, no proxy calculations. She stayed because she had discovered she liked the building when it was quiet. She had also discovered something else. Friday evenings were the evenings Michael Bennett returned to the building. He did not return as an owner. He returned as a father. Emma had earned a place in a Northeastern University outreach program for gifted students held on the 12th floor every Friday afternoon. Michael walked her to class and walked her home afterward. At 6:15, the elevator chimed. Olivia looked up. Emma burst through the doorway first, bundled in a blue winter coat with tiny flecks of snow still caught in her hair. She crossed the office in seconds and wrapped her arms around Olivia's neck. "I made something for you," she announced proudly. She reached into her coat pocket and carefully unfolded a sheet of paper. It was a hand-drawn star map. Constellations had been sketched in pencil and labeled in neat block letters. At the bottom was a note. "For Miss Olivia, my favorite constellation because you stay up late." Olivia stared at the drawing for a long moment. The feeling that rose inside her was too large and too unfamiliar to fit into words. Michael stood quietly in the doorway with snow resting on the shoulders of his coat and his hands tucked into his pockets. "We're heading home," he said. "Emma's making pasta." Olivia smiled. "Pasta? With sauce from a jar," Emma said seriously. "But I add things." "What things?" "Garlic, pepper, and a little butter at the end. That part is important." "It sounds very important." Emma nodded with complete conviction. Michael remained where he was, watching and waiting. The same way he had waited in the lobby, the same way he had waited in the basement corridor, the same way he had waited through months of silence while Olivia slowly became the person she had always been capable of becoming. "You could come," he said quietly. "If you wanted to." Olivia lowered her eyes to the star map, then she carefully folded it and slipped it into the inside pocket of her jacket, close to her heart. "I want to," she said softly. She turned off the desk lamp. For a brief moment, Its reflection lingered in the dark glass of the window before fading completely. Standing there, she realized she had never before noticed how little she would miss the office when it was finally time to leave. Together, they walked toward the elevator. Emma moved between them, holding one of Olivia's hands and one of Michael's. Outside, snow drifted lazily through the glow of the streetlights. The city seemed quieter than usual, gentler somehow. In the end, the man with the mop had owned the empire all along, but ownership had never been the point. The greatest thing Michael Bennett built was not a company, not a fortune, and not a controlling share of a corporation. It was a life defined by patience, dignity, loyalty, and love. And as the three of them stepped out into the softly falling snow, it became clear that some of the most valuable things in the world are never listed on a balance sheet. Parsis. The months that followed passed more quietly than anyone at Hale Dynamics would have believed possible. The investigations concluded exactly as many had expected. Jonathan Reed resigned before formal proceedings could reach their final stage. The findings were never dramatic enough for television and never simple enough for headlines. They consisted mostly of emails, pressure campaigns, and conversations that should never have happened. By spring, Jonathan had become little more than a cautionary story occasionally mentioned in boardrooms by people who wanted to remind themselves how quickly ambition could turn into entitlement. Hale Dynamics recovered steadily. Investors returned. Employees stopped whispering in hallways and started talking about projects again. For the first time in years, Olivia Hart found herself leading a company instead of defending one. The difference surprised her. She discovered that leadership required less performance than she had once believed. It required fewer speeches, fewer carefully rehearsed presentations, and far more listening. Michael Bennett never moved into an executive office. He never attended earnings calls unless absolutely necessary. He never sat at the head of a conference table. Whenever reporters requested interviews, he declined them. Whenever magazines asked for profiles, he ignored them. Whenever conference organizers invited him to speak, he politely refused. The attention had never interested him. Emma did not understand why so many people cared about her father. To her, he was simply the man who made pancakes on Saturdays, helped with science projects, and always remembered to bring an umbrella when rain was forecast. She preferred that version of him. Michael preferred it too. One afternoon in late April, Olivia received a package delivered directly to her office. Inside was a framed photograph. Rachel Bennett stood beside Edward Vance on the day Vance Capital had opened its first office. Both were smiling at something outside the frame. Attached to the photograph was a handwritten note from Margaret Collins. Some legacies are measured in money. The important ones never are. Olivia placed the photograph on a shelf behind her desk. Visitors often assumed it belonged to a family member. She never corrected them. In a way, it did. Summer arrived. The city grew warmer. The Charles River filled with sailboats. Tourists crowded sidewalks. Life moved forward. One evening, after a long meeting, Olivia found herself standing on the roof terrace overlooking Boston Harbor. Michael joined her a few minutes later carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her without asking. "You knew I'd still be here?" she asked. "You're always here after board meetings," he replied. She laughed. "That sounds like criticism." Observation. They stood together looking out across the water. The sun was setting beyond the skyline, turning the glass towers gold. For a while neither spoke. Then Olivia asked the question she had been carrying for months. "Do you ever regret it?" Michael looked at her. "Regret what?" "Waiting." He considered the question carefully. "No. Not even after the live stream? Especially not after the live stream." She frowned. "That makes no sense." "Maybe not." He took a sip of coffee. But people are rarely defined by the worst thing they've done. They're defined by what they do after. Olivia looked away toward the harbor. The answer stayed with her long after the conversation ended. In September, Emma turned 9. The celebration took place in Michael's apartment.